Welcome to this week's segment of For Such a Time as This, which I think is very enigmatic of where we are today in this discussion. As you know, this is coming from you live from the University of St. Thomas, and we're here to discuss Catholic social teaching and its ramifications for the issues that we are facing as a society, as a people. So I'm very happy and proud to have someone join me today who is not a stranger. He's very well known throughout the Houston community. He is a friend and a partner in the work that we've done over the years, and he is our neighbor. He is the wonderful executive director of the Rothko Chapel, none other than our own David Leslie. Welcome, David.
Larry, it's really great to be with you. Thank you.
Let's just jump into it and let everybody know, if they don't know, the Rothko Chapel is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year.
Yeah, as they say, it's a golden moment. It's quite a journey that the chapel is at 50. What has been just really, really interesting about this community organization, probably like others in the city, is it's never relaxed. It's never gotten stayed. And so as we're celebrating the 50th, it really is that convergence of the past, the present, and leaning into the future. So it's a great moment.
It is a great moment because, first of all, as a personal sidebar, it makes me feel old. Because I was there when we dedicated the chapel, and there when we placed the wonderful broken obelisk on its platform in the reflection pool, which was just a wonderful day. So Rothko has grown and changed and evolved over the years. And now it is at a place ready to take its position going forward for the next 50 years in bringing together not only humanity from across the United States, but from across the world. And that's what I've loved about it. It has really put us in touch with people who are great servant leaders from all around the world.
I agree with you on that point. And I think that it's a term that I use a lot, ecumenical, or the ecumenicity of the chapel, the ecumenicity of the founders, John and Dominic de Menil, who, as you know, were very devout and practicing Roman Catholics. And I think it's a kind of ecumenical piece that has such expansion in the sense of we're all one people, in that sense, the globalness, and that the reach of the Rothko Chapel, its sense of being an inviting place for all, is exactly that. And as such, as Houston has grown in its global outreach and reality, the people who live here, so too the chapel reflects that. Before COVID, we would count 100,000 plus visitors a year, and those are just the counted heads, but what's intriguing to me is that represents over 100 countries in that group. And so it really reflects well the international nature of the city of Houston. And I also think the international nature, the human, the universal nature of meditation, of prayer, of hope, of transformation. So it's really interesting to be at that nexus of all these different lines that kind of converge here.
Well, the thing I've always loved about the chapel, as you just mentioned, all those wonderful things, people's perspectives, opinions, viewpoints, beliefs, and faiths that it brings together, it has always, to me, exemplified that classic definition of hope, that hope is not a state of mind or state of heart. Hope is a state of constant, consistent action. And you've always connected people who are deeply involved from the humanitarian, from humanity's standpoint, but also actually doing something and helping people, tangible things. And I think that's what's important, to keep that in front of us.
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest gifts that I've been given in my life is the gift of encounter with people. And maybe also a gift of curiosity, who is my neighbor? That question that Jesus posed, who is my neighbor? It's such an inviting question to go out and find then who is your neighbor. And the beautiful thing about a place like the Rothko Chapel is that as it was envisioned, it was going to be a place that connected justice in action, love and justice, hope and getting out and doing things. And for me, in a way, you've got this juxtaposition of the chapel, this one art piece, created designed by Mark Rothko, Philip Johnson, of course, who is very well known at the University of St. Thomas campus, local architects, Howard Barnstone, Gene Aubry, who really designed this wonderful sanctuary. And as you leave the sanctuary and you walk back out onto the plaza, you can't help but being struck by, here's Barnett Newman's really amazing monumental sculpture dedicated to the living. And I really think that's important, the living legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So that sense that inner transformation is really only complete with outer transformation and vice versa. So that we're not complete and there is no hope if there's no action and no change.
The hallmark of doing this work is relationships. And the quality and nature of nurturing, developing, maintaining those relationships built on mutual trust and respect has been the hallmark, I think, of the wonderful extended family that the Rothko Chapel have brought together over the years, if not for that space, if not for the gathering of diverse human beings in every aspect, the definition of diversity, who have never had a chance to meet each other. That is, to me, another great part of the legacy.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that has made Houston, is you've been part of this fabric and we've talked a lot, is this repetition of relationships, that it's not a town that works on single encounters. It's multiple encounters in multiple places at multiple times. And seeing that consistency of presence, relationship building, inviting people into the conversation, into the story, inviting people to get involved. And you just wonder what the exponential effect is of that kind of commitment to say, you know, you're invited, you're wanted. And I think the Rothko Chapel has always had that from day one. You're wanted, you're needed. You've got to find what, maybe sometimes you've got to find what that particular calling is. And you'll do that in the company of others, right? That's coming back to your point.
Yep.
That it is that part of that journey we've got to make together. And it's just a wonderful thing. And the thing that I really like about the chapel in Houston and kind of our context is there's so many people that are willing to take you on and bring you along. You know, sometimes you just need that extra little invite and help. And it's been a great place to practice my vocation.
So let me pivot a little bit to the current situation we find ourselves in as a people. This is also the week of the 30th anniversary of Rodney King's death. We'll be celebrating in another short, believe it or not, 80 days on May 23rd, the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. I'm referring to this time now between the 30th anniversary of Rodney King's death and the upcoming first anniversary of George Floyd as this in-between time, the in-between time. The lessons we should have learned 30 years ago, and the lessons we say we perhaps have relearned since May 23rd of 2020, is interesting because history repeats itself, as we well know, and history is truly repeating itself in the reactions to these two murders. In today's world, going forward, how do you see and what do you see we can do now, and maybe use this first anniversary as a jumping off point, to talk about what we really need to be doing as a society, as a people, and moving this needle and bar farther down the road?
The thing that really bothers me is the fact that we seem to repeat patterns of behavior. And the other thing that is sad is how cruel we can be to each other as human beings. So what can we do? You know, I think what I try to do, and I think what I've tried to do in my life, and I've tried to do it vocationally, and I think the chapel is a place, is one is to invite people to speak in the first person, unfettered, tell your story. And it doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to hear it, but you just might help someone change a perspective or learn something new, even about their own community, their own neighborhood, that they may never have thought about before. And I think hearing those narratives are really, really important. And I would say that over the last year, there may just be, Larry, this moment of gifting where people, because of social media and a lot of other means to which we can carry our messages, people may be hearing each other just a little bit more clear or with a new attention. Because I think a lot of what happens in repetitive patterns is we forget very quickly if we even heard the story to begin with. I think the second thing, and it's a repeat of what we've been talking about, is sharing space together. And that is whether it's at the Rothko Chapel, at the University of St. Thomas, at any public commons, gathering spot, is we have to breathe each other's air. We have, and that may not be so good on a COVID moment, pandemic, but metaphorically, we have to share something physically. You know, I'm always struck by Dr. Stephen Kleinberg's observation that Houston, while it is one of the, if not the most diverse cities in the United States, it's still pretty segregated and very separate. So we've still got a lot of barriers to break down and bulwarks to poke holes in, but that's really important. I think the third thing I would say is just this constant appeal and mantra that we have to think to beyond our own self-interest, needs, and time. You know, there are many traditions, indigenous being probably the most well-known, that talks about the need to be always thinking about the seventh generation. In other words, the actions we take, thinking long haul. And, you know, so much of what we're measured on and what we do is one quarter or maybe a month or, you know, your immediate return. And we've got to get back to thinking longer haul.
So the question I'm going to end with for both of us is the way you just posed it. These issues and questions we're raising and must address are truly moral, ethical questions. And so the question for me that I've been trying to put out and have people resonate and respond to, what is the fair and ethical moral treatment of all human beings? What is the fair, moral, and ethical treatment of all human beings? What does that look like, act like, talk like, walk like? What is that baseline threshold that we can expect at least that all human beings have in their lives? That's the question this country has wrestled with, not wanting to have that discussion.
The scriptures, universal, are always very interesting in letting us dive into the inequities, those that have and those who have not, and that somehow that is just not the right balance. So that we just always are trying to recognize the fact that there are these imbalances, and it just sometimes is going to take a different mind thought. And until you get there, you may have to just have some systemic changes. For example, tax policy that's equitable. But I'll close. I mean, I think former Congresswoman Patricia Schroeder said it very well when the Family Leave Act was being debated so many decades ago. That here in the United States, we don't think multi-generational. We don't think connectionally. So what do? We don't want to have a family leave process here. Who needs it? Whereas you look in other societies where they're thinking that that child is going to be the next generation's producer, which will be the next generation's producer. So you invest in that for the long haul. And I think that, you know, there's some things that we can do. And at the same time, we're going to have a shift of our whole perspective on how we understand our relationships to each other. And that if you benefit, I benefit. And the flip side of it is, if you're hurt and you're in pain, I too am in that spot. And I think that's our work that we've got to just keep at and keep at and keep at.
Thank you, David. That is really, I think, wise wisdom to impart at this point. I'll end on this. In the immortal words of Dr. Benjamin Mays about reaching our goals and reaching our stars, the last sentence goes like this: but truly in the end, my brothers and sisters, for not failure, but low aim is sin. Let us aim high, aim high, aim high. I know we can do it. I know we'll answer the calling, the age-old calling that is waiting for us to respond to. And the Rothko Chapel is one of the places that if you go and you sit and you pray and you meditate in silence and stay there long enough to get outside of yourself and allow the voices that will be talking to you and the spirit in that place to enter into you, you will be a changed person. I can attest to that because I've spent many hours doing that same thing. So David, thank you again. Thank the chapel, thank the Demonills, thank all of those who have made this wonderful journey of the last 50 years of the chapel possible. And we will continue to work with you and the chapel as we go forward into this next chapter of what can be done for the sake of our common humanity in Houston, Texas. Until the next time we come together for such a time as this, as always, be safe, be well, and until then, peace, power, and love.